welcome back to NCSY Pulse. We are powered by NCSY Alumni. I'm John Ackerman. I am joined today by my good friend, my new friend, Rabbi Dave Rotenberg, or just really known as Rabbi Dave, who is the managing director of NCSY in Ottawa and Montreal. Rabbi Dave, it is so fun to have you on the show. Welcome aboard.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Rabbi Dave and I had a good time. About a month ago, we were on a conference together, and I think we knew each other before that, but that was kind of our first time hanging out a little bit, getting to know each other, and it's exciting to have you with us. So we'll get started here. Rabbi Dave, let's start at the beginning. We'll go back, tell us your superhero origin story before we go into some of your other highlight reel material. You're a comedian, and so I'm excited to hear about that. But let's go back all the way to the beginning. How did you get involved in this grand adventure we call NCSY?
Yes, I am a Balchuva. I became more observant at about 13. Once I was in Yeshiva High School, in small community, everyone goes to NCSY if there is one. I grew up in Ottawa, and a couple of my friends were going to literally just like a board games night at a shul when I was in grade 9. And it was like, why don't you come along? So that was my first NCSY program, was a board games night. We played Balderdash the entire night, which became my favorite sort of board or party game. Fast forward, whatever it was, 25 years later, I actually created a Jewish online Balderdash to play in virtual JSUs in the pandemic. And from there, I started going to Showatones and got super, super involved. Got involved as sort of part of the team leadership as a small community in Ottawa. They kept hiring us like part-time staff who would then leave. And so often, I would be the one booking the bus to go to a Showatone, stuff like that. So I did NCSY all through high school. There was some talk when I was getting smicha and moving back to Ottawa, some talk of me getting involved, ended up not happening. And I ended up doing a tour of basically every aspect of formal and informal Jewish education in the Ottawa community. So I was a campus rabbi. I taught day school. I was an afternoon school teacher and principal. So I really made the rounds. And in Canada, we have something called Torah High, which is actually an after-school credit program. So we have teens come to us to actually get a high school credit in Hebrew language or Jewish studies. And I had a really motivated group graduating from my class in the community day school. And they were planning to go to Torah High while they did public high school, but they wanted something a little bit higher level. And so they said, would you teach us this advanced class in Torah High? And one of my best friends was the director. He and I worked this out, and I ended up sort of in the back room with this group of 5 students doing really high level stuff. And the next year, that grew from 5 to I think 11 in this advanced class. And that second year, I was starting to feel like it's time for a change from what I've been doing at the community school. Rabbi Mark Rose, who's now regional director in Southern, he was running Ottawa for just that year. He was actually only in town for 1 year. He was looking for a second person to come on, become the principal of Torah High, and then assist him as he started to build programming. It seemed to be the perfect fit at the right time. So I came over, and he then, of course, ended up moving out of Ottawa not long after I started my job. And we were a great fit to work together, and it was super exciting. And then, of course, he left. And the plan originally was he was going to be managing things from a distance and traveling in and out of Ottawa. That totally didn't work. And by January, they put me in charge of programming. And by the end of the year, they're like, okay, well, you are now the city director. And I started off not as the boss. So some of the higher level responsibilities I didn't have to worry about, and I just focused on building programming. I inherited 2 bi-weekly JSUs. By the end of that year, we were in 6 or 7 schools.
Oh, wow.
We're now in about 20 schools in Ottawa. There's about 6 cemeteries
20.
later. Yeah.
Hold
Um,
on. You inherited two, and then that grew to six, and now you're in 20.
so yeah, I mean there's a whole saga there. We've really scaled our program, and we've really exploded. Especially things, this is kind of a funny story. There was this global pandemic, and it kind of put a damper on our programming for a while.
I've
Uh,
heard.
Although we totally rocked that pandemic, happy to talk about that more later. And then emerging from the pandemic, we had really laid all the groundwork so that coming back, the schools were all excited for us to come in.
Unbelievable. So you've done so many things. You're talking about, being a campus rabbi and all these different, I guess, iterations, similar iterations of your current job, where you're an educator, you're a rabbinic role model, but also a creator, and going around and not just sort of willing to sit back and wait for things to develop, but doing so many things yourself. And I want to hear how you grew to 20 programs. That's a lot for any one person or even two people to be holding on to. But I want to get to, you mentioned to me, and I'm so excited to hear about this. You told me that you moonlight as a comedian, and it's kind of like you slipped it in there, when we were talking before, between like, oh, I do a whole bunch of JSU clubs and NCSY programs and Torah High. Oh, and also I happen to be a comedian, and that's sort of like wait, a what? What's going on here? So give us some backstory. Tell us what it's like.
Yeah, so here in Canada, there's a chain of comedy clubs called Yuck Yucks. It is, I believe, the world's largest chain of comedy clubs. And when I was in grade nine, one of my friends, maybe it was winter break or something, was just like, let's get a couple guys together. Let's go to Yuck Yucks. We loved it. And something about it just spoke to me. I was always very like, to say it comedic maybe sounds like I'm like trying to play myself up. It isn't that. It's like, I was always a big joker. For sure in school, I was entertaining the guys. And then after I had been to see a couple of professional shows at the local club, I came up with like a couple of jokes. I was like, these aren't jokes. These are really like stand up material. So I said, you know what? I want to find out what it takes to get onto the amateur night at Yuck Yucks. I was 15 at the time, close to the end of grade 10. They said, okay, first thing you have to do, come see an amateur show, meet the manager. And then in those days, it was, and keep in mind, this is the late 90s, it was on payphones, really. Call in
Wow.
every Tuesday to book yourself on the Wednesday night amateur show. And so it was like every week, and it was like a real competition, all the comics calling in at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. And the first week that I wanted to go, I actually had a Gemara test that morning that I like rushed through to finish and run out the back door of the school, down the road to the 7-Eleven to jump on the payphone. So I was just under 16 when I first performed. I had like, a ton of my friends come and see me. Um, I continued to perform throughout high school, a little bit here and there when I was visiting home from yeshiva. Within a couple years from then, I proposed to my wife from the stage at Yuck Yucks. Yeah.
No.
So I spoke with the manager in advance. They put me, they were worried about like what happens for the next comic who comes up. Like that's a pretty tough act to follow. So they agreed that I was at that point, good enough to be sort of the feature act on the amateur show. That was sort of my
Right.
level. And so they put me as like the feature act at the end of the show. So, I did my whole set and then proposed. And at the time I was studying for smicha, and it was just like, there was a lot going on. And I kind of like ended up putting that on hold for a while after like, that was the big triumph.
Right.
Fast forward a couple years later, and keep in mind in those days, I was doing kind of incognito. I would wear like a cap or something like that, tzitzis tucked in. Didn't really do a lot of Jewish material. Fast forward, a number of years later, I've been working as a rabbi for a long time. Well, at least for a few years. And a neighbor wanted to try out stand up. I helped her with her material, and I went to see her at Yuck Yucks, and the manager was like, "Okay, when are we going to see you back?" So I said, one of these days. I had been during the time, even when I wasn't performing in clubs, I was still doing like community events. They needed somebody to MC, so I would come and write like Jewish material specifically for that. So for a week, I kind of debated back and forth, and I jumped right back in. And this time, although I tried to be incognito like the first couple of times, I then got a call saying, well, the Jewish Federation has booked out half the club for their young adult division. We want you to come down and like do Jewish material. So all the people knew me. So I came, I was like, okay, well, I'm the rabbi. And I came and I did a bunch of Jewish stuff and a bunch of just regular stuff. Actually, I think it was the day before that show, I was substitute teaching at the community day school. And I was like, oh, I'd love to like just have some really great Jewish bit based on my experiences in the community. Um, and it just materialized that day. There was some conversation about Jewish history. Somebody mentions the name Hitler, and this one girl, her hand shoots up. She's really excited. She says, I have that movie at home. I said, which movie do you mean? She says, Hitler on the Roof. And
No.
that was all I needed. I went home and I wrote a bit called Hitler on the Roof. When I moved to a new shul and people are like, Rabbi, we're so happy you're here. Welcome. And this one guy, he's like, you're the rabbi who does the Hitler on the Roof joke.
Incredible.
And from that moment on, I started doing comedy as the rabbi and doing material that is based on, it's not like pure Jewish material, but it's based on like situations that only I could find myself in as this sarcastic rabbi comedian. Within about a year, I got booked for my first professional show. And this is Canada. And we're talking about a rabbi comedian doing the opening spot on a Canadian Thursday night show or, Saturday night, the late show after Shabbos is over. So $5 at a time, $20 at a time. The most I've been paid by a club is $50. But the thing is the second you cross over to them paying you even $1, that's a huge,
Sure.
huge move.
That's a level.
It's a level. Like, it's a huge level. And when kids came along, again, I kind of like faded out of it a little bit, and really just did it very occasionally. But I've been back doing it for several months. I just kind of got the bug again. And for several months ago, went back and I'm trying to, build it back up. So on and off, I've been doing this for 25 years or so. And at all different levels, but mainly in clubs here in Canada.
Wow, that is such a cool story. I'm trying to imagine, first of all, you getting up there and doing Hitler on the Roof. So at some point, I'm gonna have to come out and visit and catch a live show. But do you feel like you're able to take some of, maybe it's the material, maybe it's just the skills from your stand-up comedy? Does that translate over to your role in JSU and in NCSY?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like to think that I have a strong stage presence. I developed sort of an announcer voice kind of persona over the years. So by the time I first, was asked to step in and fill in for, a community rabbi to give a sermon or to give a class, I already had a lot of experience with public speaking, with having that presence, because I'm a comedic, funny sort of guy, and I have a huge love of movies and TV. So over time, I started developing a sort of a specialty of teaching Torah through pop culture and comedy. Seinfeld is like my go-to. My final project for my master's was about Torah insights inspired by comedy. So And I mean, over the years, as I say, I've been through a lot of different stages. When I was working as a campus rabbi, it was great. You meet university students, and it's like, well, hey, why don't you come see me perform at the comedy club on Wednesday night, and then Thursday, let's get
Amazing.
coffee and do some Jewish learning. So there was a
Sure.
very natural kind of like those things really really went hand in hand. But as I say, over time, I definitely have used, as I say, a lot of my material is based on my experiences as a rabbi, and then a lot of my skills in education and developing educational programming is, using some of the skills from that other world.
Yeah, that's great. Wow, what a fun crossover. So I know that you run the JSU clubs and the predominantly we think Jewish clubs, but I also know that you've been finding yourself in schools. Obviously, most of our programs are in public schools, but you mentioned to me earlier that a number of your JSU clubs are actually in Catholic schools. So how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so I started to see that all of the Israelis moving to Ottawa were moving to Canada, and then one town further, which is called Stittsville. And so we just kept building and growing out in that part of town. And we kept working with Israelis. And I found, some sort of grassroots leaders among the Israeli population. We sponsored Haggadahs for them that we sent. They were doing like a care package for Pesach. And this is why Canada was printing for like all of our leadership teams and anyone we wanted copies of the NCSY just one Haggadah. And so just sort of kept building. And I started meeting families who kept telling me they send their kids to Sacred Heart Catholic High School. And so like,
Obviously.
so I was asking why. So I found out that there's two reasons. One of the main reasons was geography, that this town that I mentioned, Stittsville, after years and years and years of talking about it, this year, meaning 2024-25, is the first year that they finally opened a public high school in Stittsville. Previous to that, if you wanted to go to public school, they would pay for your busing, but they bust you out to this other school super far away, where we also have a JSU, by the way. That's one of those sort of occasional clubs at a school called South Carleton High School in Richmond, Ontario.
Wow.
But for the families who don't want to bus all the way out to South Carleton, so some would just opt to go to the Catholic board. Catholic education is also free here, public Catholic school. So some of the families just say, okay, well, it's much closer. We'll send our kids to the Catholic school. And then with the anti-Semitism that some people are experiencing in schools, and some of that kind of, those kinds of challenges that, depending on the school, it may be minimal and it may be very severe. Some of these families are saying, well, the public school that I'm zoned for is one where they've had a lot of trouble. And there were a lot of walkouts and protests. So we're hearing that there's a lot less of that in the Catholic board. So we're actually going to send our kids to our local Catholic school. So I worked on it for a year, and we had to try a lot of different strategies. But we finally, like a year ago in, I think, November, we finally launched Sacred Heart JSU. And then I started hearing, there's also Jewish kids in Holy Trinity High School. And so we started working on that one, and we launched that one earlier this year.
Incredible.
I started finding out that it's not only Israelis, but a lot of Russian immigrants coming to Canada and Stittsville. I started working with a grassroots leader of the Russian community. We ended up doing an info night for all of NCSY programs. And it was like, well, we really want to come to them. Where can we do it? And so I was like, listen, I've got a permit with the Catholic board for community use of school. So we ended up running an NCSY info night about Shabbatons, JSU, Torah High, summer programs in the library at Holy Trinity High School. Um, on our fall regional Showatone, we actually had the Ottawa representative giving a Dvar Torah on the Canadian regional was the JSU president of Holy Trinity JSU. Um,
Wow.
so so yeah, so that's really how it's happened is, through me just sort of keeping my ear to the ground, meeting families, learning where the kids are, and saying, okay, if that's where they are, that's where we're going. I've been in touch with the administration at St. Mark's also because I heard there's Jews there. We haven't yet launched, but they're welcoming us in. And I've long said, if there's Jews, I'm going. So there happen to be Jews in the Catholic schools, so we're coming.
That's incredible. And wow, Yasher Koach to you. That's hilarious. I'm just picturing, I don't know, if you're familiar with the TV show Scrubs? Are you
Yeah,
Scrubs
of
guy at
course.
all? So I'm picturing as you're talking about a JSU at Sacred Heart, which was the name of the hospital. I'm just picturing like your club is like you and JD and Turk and Dr. Cox, all hanging out at the JSU club.
So I have made that connection myself. They are sadly not there. Although the kids out in that part of town, this is not, less joking. They're amazing and they are super inspired. We actually, because we're running so many clubs in that part of town, ended up launching a Learn and Earn in Canada.
Amazing.
My associate, he is running that, and he has told me it's his favorite program of everything that we do. We have basically taken over a Starbucks to the point like we've needed to go and buy our own stools because we were like stealing
Wow.
every spare seat, and like some people needed to stand. And so, as I say, I have made that connection to Scrubs. None of those characters there. Although the show is, I hear rebooting
It's coming
soon.
back.
Um,
Yeah.
but I do have a little bit of a shtick, especially on the Canada-wide staff group chat, where I'm like, where is Rabbi Dave today? And I'll snap a selfie wherever I am, and especially when I'm going to the Catholic schools, I'll make sure to take a picture in front of the sign. There's a big cross there, and like Rabbi Dave's today at Sacred Heart Catholic School at Holy Trinity. But as I say, we are connecting with some pretty amazing and pretty inspired teens out in those schools.
That's awesome. And we got to somehow find a way, put on the calendar. I would love to do a live show of NCSY Pulse from Sacred Heart High School. I think that would be a ton of fun. So we got to figure out a way to get that done. I know you've had some crazy stories of meeting kids. I mean, I'm not surprised you're in Catholic schools, you're in comedy clubs, you're all over the place, but give us a story. I'm sure you've had some wild stories of kids who you thought maybe were going one way and zigzag another way, but give us a story of something that happened in one of these places that kind of took you by surprise.
Yeah, when we did that info night at the Catholic school, um, it was mainly kids from Russian families. And in the Sacred Heart part of town, these are families who've been here for a long time. What I discovered was some of these kids in the part of town where Holy Trinity is, they had just come to Canada, many of them. And there was a young man who came walking up to the Catholic school. He was wearing what looked like the cardstock kippa that they give you when you go to the kotel,
Sure.
and tzitzis to the floor. I was like, who is this kid? Um, and he was coming for the info night. Um, and it turns out he and his family had just moved to Canada like a month earlier. He was from Russia, moved to Israel. His father had been wanting to move to Canada for 10 years, was working on it. He started going to a Parsha class or something in Israel a year earlier, got super into it, said, I want to start taking on a few things, committed to putting on tzitzis. And like a few weeks later, his father's like, good news, we're moving to Canada, plunked into Holy Trinity High School. So
Wow.
that was like one thing that I was just like totally blown away. Another story which just I have to share is a young man that I'm pretty close with, who I was invited to a shul in a different part of town. And on my way out, the rabbi of the shul says, I'd love to talk to you for a few minutes. I have this crazy situation. This mother has brought her kid to learn with me, desperately hoping to inspire him. He was going to a French school, fell in with a group of Muslim friends. They started bringing him to their mosque, and he's very inspired by that. And
Wow.
he's very interested in converting to Islam. So we stood in the lobby of the shul for quite a while. We then traded messages for days. The mother reached out to me. Turns out it was somebody who I knew from years earlier. And we started encouraging the son to come to certain programs. He came to our flagship Learn and Earn location. He stayed afterwards to ask me questions. At the beginning, I saw, his attitude was like he really had his back up. He knew what he knew.
Right.
He knew what he believed. But we started encouraging more and more. Okay, maybe we should get him on a Shalaton. We should try and get him on a summer program. Early on, he didn't seem super, super interested. But slowly we saw he was like a little more interested. And then something amazing happened, which is that his mother is Sephardi. And that was like the only thing about Judaism that seemed even remotely interesting to him. Well, I said to myself, hold on a second. Our director of education in Montreal is this amazing Sephardi guy. I need to introduce the two of them. I also have a fantastic Glaubach fellow from Montreal, who's also Sephardi, who's just waiting for me to match him up with a Chavrusa. So I said, okay, so I made this connection. I said, I don't care what you learn with him. It just has to be Sephardi topics. They started to connect. This young man, Gabby, came into Ottawa for a mini Shalaton that we did. And so they met in person. We got this young man onto the mini Shalaton. They had already connected. We got him onto the regional where he met my dear colleague, Rabbi Rubin Fima, who is now one of my direct reports in Montreal. He's our sort of de facto lead staff in Montreal. He's our director of education. As I say, super cool, very warm guy. They made an instant connection. And I spoke to our Canadian head office. I said, if I can get this kid onto TJJ, I need you to guarantee that he'll be on the bus with Rabbi Fima, because we're starting to develop that relationship, and I think that's what's going to get us, the rest of the way. And by the summer, he was already inspired to go. By our regional in May, really, he was very, very, excited about his Judaism. Then he went on summer, and anyway, long story short, we got him onto Olami launch. Got him to Israel, but within, like a year and a half, we went from wanting to convert to Islam to going to yeshiva in Israel.
Wow,
so
that's wild.
So that's probably one of my strongest stories, just in terms of you never knowing where the kid is coming from and where they're going, not being willing to give up on a kid. And just knowing that you have to make your effort and figure out everything that you can do, but it is not really in your hands.
Right. It's so interesting. First of all, we would love to get this kid on the pod at some point to tell his story. Maybe we'll get you both together and you can kind of give an introduction, and he can share his story with us. Cause what a wild tale. And it's kind of, it's only the beginning. Like, we're only scratching the surface of kind of where this story is going. So it's kind of like cool to, we'll keep tabs on this and see where everything goes. I love what you said though about don't give up on a kid. I have this, we'll call it discussion. Some might call it argument, but we'll call it discussion, about kids who, who when they graduate high school who go to campus. And it's hard because on one hand, campus is full of all the challenges and the entrapments and everything that campus life has with it. I try to tell people all the time, don't give up on these kids. You don't know where they're going. You don't know the challenges they're dealing with sometimes behind the scenes. And it's important for us to make sure that we are sort of there, even though NCSY is at its core a teen organization, but to bear in mind that we have to be there and available and positive and supportive really throughout, because you never know, when things click and how it's going to click and where it's going to click. And it's important for us to kind of always stay, like you said, don't give up on people, don't give up on kids, because you really never know. That's an amazing story.
I have a quick story, if I can, just based on exactly what you're saying.
Do it.
So this is, let's say, a year and a half ago. We do, here in Ottawa, we always do 2 to 3 times a year. We do what we call a mini showathon, which is like a choose your own adventure. We'll run a Friday night, a Shabbos day, and a Saturday night. And then the teens can sign up for whichever ones they want. And then we do like a full showathon at the end of the year, in addition to the regionals. But so This was one of our sort of choose your own adventure. We called it the Retro Shabbat. A roller rink opened in Ottawa. And so we did like a totally retro poster. And it was like dress Friday night in your favorite retro outfit, youth minion and lunch Shabbos day, and then Saturday night we're going roller skating. And Saturday night, it's sort of late November in Ottawa. It's starting to get very cold. There's probably a little bit of snow on the ground. We are outdoors saying Havdalah, really singing as a group, guitar, out in the parking lot of the roller rink. And this is something that we've kind of started doing over the years, that wherever we go, it's a laser tag place, a rock climbing place, where if they can give us like a private room, great. If not, out in the parking lot for the social event is going to be like a musical Havdalah. And we've got this group singing out in the parking lot, and these 2 young ladies, probably mid-20s, see us. Now, a lot of people see us and are giving us weird looks, and we don't care.
Yeah.
These 2 young ladies see us and come running and link arms with our NCSY teens and join us for Havdalah. So it turns out that they know a little bit. They know a couple of the kids from our group, and so that they felt comfortable joining in because they knew a few of the kids. I start talking with them. And this one young lady, she and I are talking. She says, I love NCSY. I did NCSY growing up in Edmonton. It meant everything to me. I went on TJJ AP 8 years ago. And a month ago, I started keeping Shabbos. And I was just like, and she's saying that, clearly not saying NCSY was the only factor, because she had been gone from NCSY for a long time, but it was very clear that it was a huge part of the foundation.
Yeah.
And so she is telling me, like what you guys do is incredible. And that really laid the foundation for me, that I would never have come to this decision that I made a month ago, if not for what I got from NCSY, 8 years ago. So, just to highlight that story, you never know when the pieces are going to click or what's going to happen. Again, quick selfie for our Canada White staff group chat. One of our staff was like, yes, she went on AP with my sister-in-law. And so, the connections were being made. Yeah.
Amazing. You mentioned some of the Learn and Earns and some of the different programs that you run. You also mentioned that they were in Canada, not to be confused. I learned this on our managers conference, that Canada is not Canada, pronounced strangely. So I am now totally aware that Canada is a small suburb of Ottawa, correct? Okay. All right. So I know my Canada from my Canada. But you have this Learn and Earn that's doing very, very well in Canada. But I know that it wasn't always that way. So give us a little backstory on this program, because, on the show, we like to talk about sometimes things going wrong or maybe not going wrong, but not going the way we thought, and then how we rebound, how we take another swing, and what we can learn from those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, we happen to be very lucky. We've had a lot of success in Ottawa, and most of what we try, seems to take off. But when we were, starting to build up our programs in Canada, which, yes, our Canadian CEO, Rabbi Black, used to make fun of me for talking about Canada. And he also said, well, it just sounds like somebody's mispronouncing Canada.
So you're saying you're the CEO of Canada NCSY?
Oh, yes. Well, one
Right?
day. But I said to myself already a couple years ago, I said, well, we've got this presence in Canada. We know a lot of teams there. Why don't we try a learning program out in Canada? We actually have a storefront in Centerpoint where we run our Torah High classes. That's where we run our flagship Learn and Earn. That's where we run our dinners. But I said, okay, let's just have some teens meet at a Starbucks. I know that's a little more of the U.S. model already. Probably a lot of the listeners are very familiar with that. We'll just meet in a Starbucks. It'll just be me with a handful of teens. If we can get 5 to start, that would be amazing. And we did. We got probably 6 to start. And we did it 2-3 times before the end of that year. Picked it up in the fall, and the first one was like 2 kids came out. And, I had just hired somebody new full-time, and he took over that program. And we were trying it every 2 weeks. And he would get 1, he would get 2, he would get 3. And we're just like, there isn't really a lot of momentum there. So he said to me, it's not really happening. I said, okay, so let's focus on some other things for now. But we know that the potential in that neighborhood is so strong. So we're not canceling it. We're kind of putting it on hold. And I think that that's really sort of an important thing. Sometimes we go, really gung-ho and jump into something. And I'm proud to say we haven't had any spectacular failures in Ottawa, but we have had things that just haven't worked out. And that's
right.
I would say that probably the reason why it's been like that is because we ease into things. We'll try it out. Let's try and learn from it. And we've had other clubs that have not gone well and things like that. And every time I try to learn something about the community, the teens in this part of town are more into this, or we need to focus on this kind of after-school program or Shabbos program, whatever it is. Or, our community is more interested in X than they are in Y. And so with Canada in particular, we definitely put it on hold. But then we started building up even more clubs, and kids started coming on Showatones. And it was last January, or maybe in advance of last January, that I went back to my associate and I said, okay, it's time to try Canada again. Look at the teams that we know, and let's get them going, and let's speak to parents, and let's talk to our contacts in the Russian and Israeli communities. So he started it back up as a bi-weekly in the Starbucks. Immediately we had about 10. By the end of the year, we were bi-weekly with almost 20.
Awesome. Wow. Listen, that's the only way to do it. You got to take the lessons where you can and grow where you can. And thank you very much, Rabbi Dave, for joining us today. Everybody, this has been NCSY Pulse, powered by NCSY Alumni. You can find us on Instagram at NCSY Pulse, on YouTube at NCSY Pulse. We are on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.